A karate master tells a one-legged veteran he can't train, humiliating the decorated Marine in front of an entire dojo full of students. The arrogant instructor declares that his elite academy doesn't accept handicapped individuals who might distract serious fighters, suggesting the Purple Heart recipient try wheelchair basketball instead. But the quiet janitor mopping floors in the corner isn't just another employee. This is Steven Seagal himself, working undercover to expose fraudulent martial arts schools. The master has no idea he just destroyed a war hero in front of a man who spent decades teaching respect through bone-crushing lessons. While 30 students watch the veteran limp toward the exit in shame, the legendary action star stops cleaning and fixes his dark eyes on the cruel instructor. The dojo owner keeps bragging about his high standards, completely unaware that he's being studied by someone who turns bullies into cautionary tales. What happens when you humiliate a hero in front of the wrong janitor? Will the master survive? Learning why some legends work in the shadows. What happened next would terrorize the instructor for the rest of his pathetic existence. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Bobby Kellerman sat in his 2019 Honda Civic outside his modest two-story home, staring at the Purple Heart in its presentation case on the passenger seat. The late afternoon sun cast harsh shadows across the metal surface, making the gold profile of George Washington seem to mock him. 23 minutes. That's how long he'd been sitting here at 3:47 p.m. on this Tuesday, unable to face walking through his own front door. Through the kitchen window, he could see Linda helping 6-year-old Emma with her homework at the table. His wife's blonde hair caught the light as she leaned over their daughter's workbook, pointing at something with patient encouragement. Emma's small legs swung from the chair, her sneakers barely reaching the floor. They looked perfect together, a complete family. Portrait missing only one piece. The missing piece that ended just below his right knee. Bobby's phantom limb screamed with fire that wasn't there, nerves trying to send signals to a foot that lay buried somewhere in the Afghan desert. He gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles went white, the carbon fiber prosthetic pressing uncomfortably against his jeans. The VA counselor called it adjustment syndrome. Bobby called it hell. The front door opened, and Emma burst out like a miniature tornado, her backpack bouncing as she ran toward the car. Her hazel eyes, his eyes, lit up when she saw him. "Daddy, Daddy, you're home." She yanked open his door before he could stop her, throwing her arms around his neck with the fierce love only a 6-year-old could manage. "Mommy made your favorite. Mac and cheese." Bobby forced his face into what he hoped looked like a smile. "That sounds great, sweetheart." His voice came out rougher than intended. Linda appeared in the doorway, concern flickering across her blue eyes as she took in his posture, the metal case, the too long pause before he'd gotten out of the car. She'd learned to read his storms. Dinner passed in a blur of Emma's chatter. About her day, Linda's gentle questions about his physical therapy appointment, and Bobby's careful answers that revealed nothing. When Emma asked why Daddy seemed sad all the time, the fork felt heavy in his hand. "Daddy's just tired, baby," Linda said quickly, but her eyes never left Bobby's face. He excused himself to the bathroom, locking the door behind him. In the mirror, a stranger stared back, hollow cheeks, eyes that had seen too much, the Purple Heart citation hanging crooked on the wall behind him. The citation praised his extraordinary heroism and selfless service. Extraordinary. He couldn't even walk up his own stairs without wincing. Later, lying in bed at 2 a.m., Bobby felt Linda's hand find his shoulder in the darkness. She knew he wasn't sleeping. She always knew. "I love you," she whispered into the silence. "All of you. Every piece." Bobby squeezed his eyes shut, tasting salt. Outside, Riverside slept peacefully, protected by men and women who came home whole. He pulled Linda's hand to his chest and held on tight, wondering if heroes were supposed to feel this broken. At 9 a.m. sharp, Bobby knocked on Dr. Elena Martinez's office door. The VA counseling center smelled like industrial disinfectant and broken dreams, but Dr. Martinez's office felt different, warmer, with actual plants and family photos instead of government-issued motivational posters. "How are we doing today, Bobby?" Dr. Martinez settled into her chair, her kind eyes already reading his body language. At 50-something, she'd heard every veteran's story twice. but she listened like each one mattered. Same as always. Bobby slumped into the familiar chair, his prosthetic clicking against the metal leg. Linda's worried. Emma keeps asking why I'm sad. I can't even. He stopped, jaw clenching. Dr. Martinez flipped through his file, but Bobby knew she had his declining mental health scores memorized. Your physical therapy reports show excellent progress. You're walking better than most amputees at your stage. Walking. The word tasted bitter. Sure, I can walk to the mailbox without falling down. Parade me around as a success story. What did you do before your injury? For yourself, not for the Corps. Bobby frowned. I boxed some. Played basketball. Normal stuff. Physical activity gave you confidence, purpose, identity. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. Your body was your ally. Now it feels like a traitor. The accuracy stung. Bobby had been the guy other Marines came to for fitness advice, the one who led morning PT runs and never backed down from a challenge. Now he couldn't climb stairs without planning the ascent. What if we found a way to make your body your ally again? Doc, I'm not running marathons on this thing. I'm thinking martial arts. Bobby almost laughed. Karate? Seriously? Discipline. Mental focus. Adapting your body to new realities instead of mourning what's gone. Dr. Martinez pulled out a tablet, scrolling through local options. There are schools that specialize in adaptive training. Veterans who found purpose again through. Purpose. Bobby shook his head. I had purpose. I led Marines. I protected villages. I stopped bad guys from hurting good people. Now I collect disability checks and feel sorry for myself. Maybe you could protect people again. Different battlefield, same warrior. That afternoon, Bobby sat at his kitchen table with his laptop while Emma napped upstairs. Linda had taken extra shifts at the clinic, and the house felt tomb quiet. He typed martial arts Riverside, California into Google, feeling ridiculous. The search results made him feel worse. Smiling families in matching uniforms. Confidence for kids. Get fit and have fun. Everything looked designed for suburban parents wanting their children to learn discipline and stranger danger. Then, he found the Golden Dragon Academy. The website was professional, sleek. Tournament trophies gleamed in high-resolution photos. Master Kevin Yamamoto stood surrounded by serious-looking students, his bio listing competition victories and celebrity endorsements. No cartoon mascots or birthday party packages here. Elite training for serious students only, the homepage. Declared, discover your warrior potential. Bobby screenshotted the address and class schedule. Through the window, he could see kids riding bikes on the sidewalk, their laughter carrying through the glass. Normal kids with normal legs living normal lives. Maybe he could be normal again too. When Linda came home at 6, she found him still at the laptop. Find anything interesting? She squeezed his shoulder, reading over his screen. Maybe. Bobby pointed at the Golden Dragon Academy page. They look serious. Professional. Linda studied the photos, her nurse's eye noting details. They do look impressive. Are you going to call them? I was thinking about just going to look. See what it's about. Bobby Kellerman. Linda knelt beside his chair, taking his hands. Just go look. What's the worst that could happen? Chapter 3. The Golden Dragon Academy occupied a converted warehouse with floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed everything happening inside. At 6:30 p.m., Bobby sat in his Honda, engine off, watching advanced students move through complex kata sequences with military precision. The training floor bustled with organized chaos. 30 students in pristine white GIs executing synchronized movements while instructors barked corrections. The place looked exactly like its website promised. Elite, professional, serious. Bobby counted 3 black belts leading separate groups, their movements fluid and confident. These weren't suburban parents learning self-defense. These people looked like they could actually fight. In the background, barely noticeable among the organized activity, a maintenance worker in gray coveralls methodically wiped down equipment. The janitor appeared to be in his 60s, graying hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, moving around the students with surprising awareness of the space. Bobby found himself watching the custodian more than the martial artists. The man never got in anyone's way, never interrupted the flow of training, but somehow anticipated every movement around him. When a student stumbled backward during a throw, the janitor was already stepping aside. When someone needed a water break, clean towels appeared without being requested. The guy moved like he understood combat, not just cleaning. A simple Steve name patch was visible on his coveralls as he organized sparring gear with the same methodical precision Bobby had seen in senior NCOs who'd survived multiple deployments. Every tool had its place, every movement served a purpose. The janitor's coveralls were clean but worn, suggesting someone who took pride in his work without worrying about appearances. His build looked solid under the loose fabric, not gym muscles, but the practical strength that came from decades of physical labor. Or physical training. Bobby shook his head. He was projecting. The guy was probably just a careful worker who'd learned to stay out of the way in a busy dojo. But something about the janitor's stillness commanded attention. While everyone else moved with the aggressive energy of competition training, this man radiated the kind of calm that came from absolute confidence. He handled equipment like someone who understood its purpose beyond mere maintenance. Through the windows, Bobby watched Master Yamamoto demonstrate a throwing technique to advanced students. The instructor's movements were technically correct, but somehow lacked the fluid grace of the janitor organizing mats in the corner. Bobby checked his watch, 7:10 p.m. He'd been sitting here for 40 minutes, building courage like a teenage boy working up the nerve to ask someone to prom. The automatic doors reflected his headlights as other cars came and went, parents dropping off kids, serious-looking adults heading to evening classes. Everyone belonged here except him. The janitor looked up from his work, and for just a moment, their eyes met through the window. The older man's gaze held steady, neither curious nor dismissive, just aware, like he saw everything that happened in his space and filed it away for future reference. Bobby felt heat rise in his cheeks. Getting caught staring at some random custodian made him feel even more pathetic. Time to stop being a coward. He turned off the engine, grabbed his keys, and walked toward the entrance. The automatic doors slid open with a soft whoosh, revealing the sounds and smells of serious training. Chapter for the Golden Dragon Academy hit Bobby's senses like a wall of controlled violence. Sharp key eyes punctuated the slap of bare feet on mats. Instructors' commands echoing off converted warehouse walls. The smell of sweat and discipline hung in the air like incense. The reception area showcased the school's legitimacy with museum-quality displays. Trophies gleamed under track lighting, framed photographs showed Master Yamamoto posing with minor celebrities, and price lists for various programs were mounted in professional frames. Everything screamed success and exclusivity. Behind a reception desk, Tracy Wu looked up from her phone. Early 20s with purple highlights in her black hair. She wore the standard academy polo shirt and the practiced smile of someone paid to be enthusiastic. The smile faltered slightly when she noticed Bobby's gait. "Hi there. How can I help you today?" Her eyes kept drifting to his right leg, where his prosthetic was visible below his jeans. "I'm interested in beginning martial arts training." Bobby kept his voice steady, military bearing intact despite his nerves. "Fitness and discipline. I saw your website." "Oh, that's great." Tracy's enthusiasm sounded forced now. She glanced toward the training floor, then back at Bobby's prosthetic. Our classes do require full physical capability for safety reasons. You know, lots of movement and..." She trailed off, clearly uncomfortable. Bobby had seen that look before, the careful politeness that preceded rejection. "I'm a Marine veteran, Purple Heart recipient. I think I can handle some physical activity." "Oh, thank you for your service." The automatic response came too quickly, too bright. "But I should probably have you speak with Master Yamamoto about our requirements. Our training is pretty intense and insurance liability." Tracy disappeared into the back office, leaving Bobby standing in the reception area like a museum exhibit. Other parents and students waiting for evening classes began noticing him, their conversations dropping to whispers. He caught fragments. "Prosthetic leg. Seems determined. Probably shouldn't." The mysterious janitor continued his work nearby, now organizing sparring gear with methodical precision. Steve moved like someone who understood the equipment's purpose beyond mere storage. Gloves, sorted by size and condition, protective gear arranged for quick access, everything positioned with the attention to detail Bobby recognized from weapons maintenance. Muffled voices carried from Master Yamamoto's office. Bobby couldn't make out words, but Tracy's tone suggested she was explaining a problem that needed the boss's attention. The janitor looked up from organizing shin guards, catching Bobby's eye for the second time tonight. This close, Bobby could see the man's features clearly, weathered but handsome, with dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything they observed. There was something ancient in that gaze, like he'd seen enough of human nature to predict how any situation would unfold. Steve nodded slightly, a gesture so subtle it might have been Bobby's imagination, before returning to his work. Tracy emerged from the office, her discomfort now obvious to everyone in the reception area. Master Yamamoto will speak with you in just a moment. He's finishing up with some administrative details. The pause before administrative details hung in the air like a warning. Bobby straightened his shoulders, Marine discipline overriding civilian anxiety. Whatever came next, he'd face it with dignity. He'd survived IED explosions and months of rehabilitation. He could handle one conversation with a martial arts instructor. But as voices grew louder in the back office, he wondered if Linda's question had been prophetic. What's the worst that could happen? He was about to find out. Master Kevin Yamamoto emerged from his office at 7:25 p.m. like a man taking center stage. At 42, he possessed the kind of physical presence that martial arts schools used in their marketing materials. Perfect posture, immaculate black GI with multiple Dan rankings embroidered in gold, and the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room. His eyes swept over Bobby with the clinical assessment of a predator evaluating prey. The evaluation took less than 3 seconds and clearly found Bobby wanting. I understand you're interested in training here. Yamamoto's voice carried across the reception area without effort, drawing attention from every corner of the dojo. The Golden Dragon Academy maintains the highest standards in the region. Bobby felt 30 pairs of eyes turned toward them as the evening training session ground to a halt. Students pretended to adjust their GIs while parents suddenly found their phones fascinating, but everyone was listening. I'm looking for serious martial arts instruction, Bobby replied, keeping his military bearing intact. Discipline, fitness, traditional training, serious instruction. Yamamoto repeated the words like they tasted bitter. You see, our programs require complete physical integrity from all participants. We cannot accommodate students with physical limitations that might compromise training quality or distract our serious students. The words hit like a physical blow. Bobby felt heat rise in his cheeks as snickers erupted from a group of teenage students. Their parents looked away, embarrassed but unwilling to intervene. I served 2 tours in Afghanistan, Bobby said, his voice tightening. I lost my leg protecting. Yes, very admirable. Yamamoto cut him off with the dismissive tone of someone brushing away an annoying insect. But real martial arts require complete physical capability. Perhaps you should consider adaptive recreational activities more suited to your situation. I believe the community center offers wheelchair basketball. The suggestion landed like a slap. Yamamoto spoke slowly and loudly, as if Bobby's missing leg had somehow affected his hearing or intelligence. Several students laughed outright now, feeding off their instructor's cruelty. I don't need a wheelchair, Bobby managed, his hands clenching into fists. Of course not. But you do need realistic expectations. Yamamoto gestured toward the training floor where his students demonstrated their complete physical integrity. This is a professional facility for elite athletes. We maintain standards that simply cannot be compromised for feel-good inclusion projects. The humiliation was complete and public. Bobby's prosthetic suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds, his gait more awkward than it had ever been. Every eye in the building tracked his movement as shame burned through his chest. He'd survived combat, explosions, and months of rehabilitation, but 30 seconds of targeted cruelty from this perfectly groomed predator had reduced him to a broken spectacle. I'm sure you understand, Yamamoto continued, his voice carrying false sympathy that made the insult worse. Insurance liability, safety concerns, maintaining our reputation for excellence. Nothing personal, you understand. Everything about it was personal. Bobby turned toward the exit, his uneven footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. Behind him, he heard Yamamoto addressing his students. This is why we maintain standards, people. Martial arts is about pushing beyond limitations, not accommodating them. The automatic doors seemed miles away as Bobby fought to maintain what dignity he had left. His prosthetic caught on nothing, but felt like it was betraying him with every step, making his departure a humiliating display of everything Yamamoto had just declared unacceptable. 30 pairs of eyes watched a decorated Marine veteran limp out of their elite dojo, dismissed like garbage that had wandered in off the street. Chapter 6. Bobby reached for the door handle at 7:28 p.m., his face burning with humiliation that seemed to radiate from his chest outward. The entire Golden Dragon Academy had gone silent except for the soft, uneven sound of his footsteps on the polished floor. Behind him, the whispers started immediately. Did you see how he walked? Can you imagine him trying to spar? Master Yamamoto was just being realistic. Each comment felt like another weight added to his shoulders. The reception area that had seemed welcoming 40 minutes ago now felt like a gauntlet designed to showcase his inadequacy. Tracy wouldn't meet his eyes, suddenly finding paperwork that required her immediate attention. As Bobby's fingers touched the cool metal of the door handle, he felt someone watching him. Not with the cruel curiosity of the students or the embarrassed pity of their parents, but with something different. Something that made the hair on his neck stand up. He glanced back. The janitor had stopped working entirely. Steve stood beside a rack of sparring equipment, his weathered hands resting on a mop handle, but his posture suggested someone who could turn any object into a weapon. His dark eyes held Bobby's gaze with an intensity that seemed to see everything. The injustice of what had just happened, the waste of potential, the cruelty disguised as professional standards. Unlike everyone else who either stared with morbid fascination or looked away in embarrassment, this man's expression revealed something dangerous. Not the hot anger of immediate violence, but the cold calculation of someone who had seen real combat and understood that actions had consequences. The janitor's stillness was predatory. While Master Yamamoto basked in his performance and students whispered their commentary, Steve radiated the kind of controlled menace that came from absolute confidence in his ability to handle any situation that might arise. His coveralls and humble position couldn't disguise what Bobby's military training recognized. This was a warrior evaluating an injustice and finding it unacceptable. For just a moment, their eyes met across the dojo floor. Bobby felt something pass between them, a recognition that transcended their different circumstances. Warrior acknowledging warrior, despite the vast gulf between their apparent stations in life. Steve's gaze promised nothing overtly, but Bobby sensed that this humiliation had been witnessed by someone who understood its true weight. Someone who knew the difference between a disabled veteran seeking purpose and the theatrical cruelty of a man drunk on petty power. The janitor's hands shifted slightly on the mop handle, and Bobby glimpsed something in his stance that suggested extensive training in disciplines that had nothing to do with floor maintenance. The way he held the mundane tool, the balance of his feet, the subtle positioning that kept multiple exit routes available. Everything screamed professional competence at a level that made Master Yamamoto's flashy demonstrations look like amateur theater. Master Yamamoto continued his lecture to the students, completely oblivious to the fact that his performance had been cataloged by eyes that had seen real violence and found his brand of cruelty wanting. Bobby pushed through the exit doors into the cool evening air, but he carried with him the memory of those penetrating eyes. For the first time since entering the Golden Dragon Academy, he didn't feel entirely alone. Someone had witnessed what happened. Someone who mattered. Chapter 7. The Golden Dragon Academy parking lot felt like a confessional booth at 8:45 p.m., dark enough to hide Bobby's shame, but not quiet enough to silence the voices in his head replaying every moment of his humiliation. He'd been sitting in his Honda for over an hour, unable to face going home to Linda's hopeful questions and Emma's innocent enthusiasm. Through his windshield, he watched the evening classes end in a steady stream of satisfied students heading to their cars. Parents chatted about their children's progress, while serious adults discussed upcoming tournaments. Everyone belonged to something Bobby had been deemed unworthy to join. Master Yamamoto emerged laughing loudly with several senior students, his BMW keys jingling as he regaled them with some story that required dramatic gestures. The red BMW roared to life with the aggressive rumble of someone who needed his car to announce his importance to the world. The parking lot gradually emptied until only a few vehicles remained under the pale streetlights. Bobby was reaching for his ignition when someone tapped on his passenger window. The janitor from inside stood beside his car, no longer in coveralls, but wearing simple jeans and a black t-shirt that revealed a solid, athletic build. Up close, his weathered features suggested someone who'd lived a hard life, but retained the kind of handsome bone structure that spoke of good genetics and careful maintenance. "Excuse me." The man's voice was low and measured, each word chosen with precision. "Do you have a moment to talk?" Bobby had nothing to lose and everything to gain from any conversation that didn't involve explaining his evening to his wife. He unlocked the passenger door. Steve slid into the car with fluid, economical movement that confirmed Bobby's earlier assessment. This was not a man who cleaned floors for a living, or at least, cleaning floors was not his primary skill set. "My name is Steve," he said simply, settling into the passenger seat with the careful posture of someone always ready to move quickly. "I saw what happened in there tonight." "Yeah, well, you and 30 other people." Bobby's voice came out harsher than intended. "Hope it was entertaining." "It was wrong." Steve's tone carried absolute certainty. "And Kevin Yamamoto is going to learn that actions have consequences." Bobby studied his unexpected visitor. Steve appeared to be in his early 60s, but his eyes held the kind of depth that came from seeing too much of human nature in its rawest forms. His speech patterns suggested education and intelligence far beyond what his humble position implied. "You ask very specific questions for a janitor," Bobby said as Steve began inquiring about his military service with the precision of someone who understood combat logistics, Afghan terrain, and IED tactics better than most civilians had any right to. "I've worked with military personnel," Steve replied carefully. "Law enforcement too. I know what real warriors look like, and I know what fake ones look like. And which category do I fall into? The real kind. Which is why what happened tonight was unacceptable." Steve's questions continued with surgical precision, probing Bobby's background with the skill of someone conducting a professional assessment. He knew about patrol procedures, understood the psychological impact of losing limbs to explosives, and spoke about rehabilitation with the authority of someone who'd guided other veterans through similar challenges. "What happened in there tonight was wrong," Steve repeated, his voice taking on a harder edge. "And Kevin Yamamoto is going to learn that actions have consequences. Are you interested in real training?" Chapter 8. My name is Steven Seagal. The words hung in the car's confined space like a revelation that reconfigured everything Bobby thought he understood about the last 2 hours. "I've been investigating fraudulent martial arts schools that exploit the art for profit while abandoning its spiritual foundations." Bobby's shock was complete. Steven Seagal, the Steven Seagal from movies he'd watched as a teenager, had just spent the evening mopping floors and organizing equipment while witnessing his public humiliation. The cognitive dissonance made his head spin. "I work undercover to observe authentic martial arts schools versus commercial operations that prey on people's insecurities and vulnerabilities," Seagal continued in his characteristic measured tone. "I've been monitoring Kevin Yamamoto for 3 months because of activities that go far beyond poor teaching methods." "Activities?" Bobby managed, still processing that a Hollywood action star was sitting in his Honda Civic explaining covert surveillance operations. "Money laundering, connections to underground fighting circuits, exploitation of vulnerable students for criminal enterprises." Seagal's voice remained calm, but his eyes hardened. "What you experienced tonight was just the surface layer of a much deeper corruption." Bobby's military training kicked in, overriding his celebrity starstruck confusion. "You're investigating him? Like, officially? Let's say I have contacts in law enforcement who value my insights into certain criminal activities that intersect with martial arts." Seagal's smile held no warmth. "Yamamoto's operation runs deeper than mere prejudice against disabled students. He's connected to people who view human beings as commodities." The implications sent ice through Bobby's veins. "What kind of commodities?" "The kind that fight for other people's entertainment and profit." Seagal leaned forward, his presence filling the car's interior with an intensity that made Bobby understand why movie cameras had been drawn to this man. "I'm offering to train you privately, Bobby, but I need you to understand that accepting my offer means becoming part of something larger than personal development." "Meaning?" "Meaning that your training might help save lives. Young lives." Students who trusted the wrong instructor and found themselves trapped in situations they never imagined. Seagal demonstrated his authenticity with a simple wrist control technique that transformed Bobby's extended hand into a lever of excruciating pain before releasing it instantly. The movement was so fluid and precise that Bobby barely saw it happen, but the brief agony convinced him that whatever else Steven Seagal might be, he was genuinely one of the most dangerous human beings Bobby had ever encountered. Real martial arts are about overcoming limitations, not succumbing to them, Seagal explained, his voice returning to its normal measured cadence. Your prosthetic leg isn't a weakness, Bobby. It's proof of your ability to adapt and overcome anything life throws at you. With proper understanding, every disadvantage can become an advantage. Seagal wrote an address on a piece of paper torn from a notebook that appeared from nowhere. Tomorrow, 6 a.m. Come if you want to learn what real strength means. And Bobby, bring workout clothes and an open mind. What we're going to do together might be more important than either of us realizes right now. Bobby took the paper, his hands still trembling slightly from the wrist technique demonstration. Why me? Why not just bust Yamamoto yourself? Because busting Yamamoto requires evidence that can hold up in court. And because sometimes the best way to expose a fraud is to show people what authentic training looks like. Seagal opened the passenger door, pausing before he got out. What happened tonight was the beginning of your real education, Bobby, not the end. The warehouse address led Bobby through Riverside's industrial district to a building that looked abandoned from the outside. At 5:45 a.m., the morning air carried the smell of motor oil and distant coffee shops, but the side door Seagal had mentioned stood unlocked as promised. Inside, Bobby found himself in a space that redefined his understanding of what a training facility could be. The converted warehouse featured traditional martial arts equipment arranged with museum-quality precision, heavy bags that showed decades of use but perfect maintenance, meditation areas with simple cushions placed at exact intervals, and weapon racks displaying tools that looked functional rather than decorative. Steven Seagal was already there, dressed in simple black training clothes, moving through a kata sequence that flowed like water but struck with the precision of surgical instruments. Each technique demonstrated perfect body mechanics, economy of motion, and the kind of centeredness that came from decades of disciplined practice. Punctuality is the first lesson, Seagal said without stopping his movement or looking at Bobby. Warriors respect time because they understand its value. Bobby stood awkwardly near the entrance, unsure whether to interrupt or wait. His prosthetics suddenly felt clumsy and obvious in this space dedicated to physical perfection. Sit. Seagal gestured toward a meditation cushion. Before we address your body, we need to address your relationship with your prosthetic. The next hour challenged everything Bobby thought he knew about his disability. Instead of treating his artificial leg as a limitation to overcome, Seagal reframed it as a tool to understand and master. Your prosthetic is not a weakness, Seagal explained in his measured tone, guiding Bobby through breathing exercises that focused awareness on his altered center of gravity. It's proof of your ability to adapt and overcome. Every disadvantage can become an advantage with proper understanding. The meditation revealed truths Bobby had been avoiding. His prosthetic didn't hurt. His resistance to accepting it caused the pain. His balance issues stemmed from fighting his new reality instead of embracing it. His shame came from viewing himself through other people's expectations rather than his own capabilities. Your artificial leg provides certain benefits that natural limbs cannot, Seagal continued, having Bobby stand and explore basic stances. It's harder than bone. It doesn't fatigue. It cannot be injured in ways that would disable a flesh and blood limb. They worked on fundamental positioning, with Seagal making minute adjustments to Bobby's posture that revealed how his prosthetic could actually improve his stability and striking power. The carbon fiber construction created a solid foundation that absorbed impact differently than natural tissue. Feel the difference, Seagal instructed as Bobby practiced weight shifts between his legs. Your prosthetic provides a stable platform that never compromises under stress. Your natural leg provides sensitivity and adaptability. Together, they create capabilities that purely natural limbs cannot match. For the first time since his injury, Bobby began feeling like a warrior. Again rather than a victim. The breathing exercises quieted the phantom pain that had plagued him for months. The balance work revealed strength he'd forgotten he possessed. The philosophical reframing transformed his greatest source of shame into a potential advantage. Physical techniques are meaningless without proper mental foundation, Seagal explained as the session concluded. Your prosthetic is not something you must overcome, it's something you must integrate. Tomorrow, we begin teaching your new body how to fight. Bobby left the warehouse with homework assignments that had nothing to do with physical exercise. Daily meditation focused on accepting his altered body. Visualization exercises that explored his prosthetics capabilities, and mental rehearsal of movements that incorporated rather than avoided his artificial limb. We're not just rebuilding your body, Bobby, Seagal had said as they concluded. We're rebuilding your spirit. Chapter 10 At 2 p.m. that same day, Steven Seagal returned to the Golden Dragon Academy for his afternoon custodial shift, sliding back into his gray coveralls like an actor assuming a familiar role. The transformation was complete, from martial arts master to invisible maintenance worker in the span of minutes. But invisible didn't mean unobservant. Seagal moved through his cleaning duties with methodical precision while his trained eyes cataloged every detail that others missed. The expensive cars in the parking lot belonged to men whose prosperity didn't match their listed occupations. The hushed conversations in Master Yamamoto's office occurred with suspicious frequency. The students who received extra attention from instructors shared certain characteristics: exceptional fighting ability, limited family connections, and the kind of desperation that made them vulnerable to exploitation. During his scheduled break, Seagal retreated to the supply closet that doubled as his command post. His smartphone contained apps that most janitors didn't need: background check services, license plate databases, and encrypted communication. Channels that connected him to law enforcement contacts who valued his insights into criminal activities intersecting with martial arts. Viktor Kozlov's name appeared in multiple databases with troubling consistency. The Russian immigrant owned several import-export businesses that served as textbook fronts for money laundering operations. His associates included former Soviet military personnel who'd transitioned to organized crime after the USSR's collapse. Most concerning, Kozlov had been linked to human trafficking investigations in 3 different states, though prosecutors had never assembled sufficient evidence for indictment. Seagal photographed license plates with a concealed camera disguised as a cleaning supply inventory device. 2 of Kozlov's known associates had visited the dojo 3 times in the past week, always meeting privately with Yamamoto in his office. Their conversations, glimpsed through careful positioning while cleaning nearby areas, involved terms like recruitment, transportation, and overseas opportunities that suggested something far more sinister than martial arts instruction. The evening classes proceeded normally on the surface, but Seagal's experience with predators allowed him to identify patterns that would escape casual observation. Yamamoto paid special attention to young men aged 18 to 25 who demonstrated exceptional athletic ability but lacked strong family support systems. These students received free private lessons, special dietary supplements, and invitations to advanced training sessions held at undisclosed locations. 3 promising students from last month's roster had stopped attending regular classes without explanation. Their contact information had been mysteriously removed from the academy's database, and staff members claimed ignorance about their whereabouts when concerned friends inquired. Seagal observed a meeting between Yamamoto and 2 men whose Slavic accents and expensive jewelry marked them as Kozlov's representatives. The conversation, partially overheard while he emptied trash bins strategically positioned outside the office, involved payment schedules and product quality standards that had nothing to do with legitimate martial arts instruction. The Americans train differently, one visitor had said. Military background makes them valuable, worth the extra investment. How many can you deliver this month? The other had asked. 4 confirmed. Maybe 6 if the new prospects work out. Seagal made encrypted notes on his observations while maintaining his custodial routine. The operation was larger and more sophisticated than initially suspected, with international connections that would require federal involvement to dismantle properly. Local law enforcement lacked the resources and jurisdiction to tackle a trafficking network that moved human cargo across state and national borders. But federal cases required ironclad evidence and patient investigation. Moving too quickly would alert the criminals and endanger their victims. Young men who trusted their instructor and had no idea they were being groomed for exploitation. Bobby's training would need to accelerate. This wasn't just about helping. One disabled veteran regained confidence. Lives hung in the balance, and time was running out. Chapter 11. The warehouse training space felt different when Bobby arrived at 6 a.m. 3 days later. His posture had improved noticeably, shoulders back, head up, the careful balance of someone who'd spent hours learning to work with rather than against his altered anatomy. The daily meditation assignments had begun showing results in reduced phantom pain and improved sleep. Better, Seagal noted without ceremony, already moving through warm-up exercises. Your body is starting to remember what it means to be a weapon instead of a burden. Today's lesson would transform theory into practice. Seagal began teaching Bobby adapted Aikido techniques that turned his prosthetic from limitation into advantage, starting with the fundamental principle that had guided his own martial arts philosophy for decades: using an opponent's energy against them. Your artificial leg is essentially a weapon, Seagal explained, demonstrating how the hard carbon fiber could deliver devastating strikes to pressure points and nerve clusters. It's harder than bone, doesn't transmit pain, and never fatigues. Most importantly, opponents don't expect it to be used aggressively. They practiced throws where Bobby's prosthetic became a fulcrum for leverage, generating more rotational power than a natural leg could provide. The carbon fiber construction created a rigid anchor point that never compressed under stress, allowing Bobby to redirect an opponent's momentum with mechanical precision. Seagal taught him to fight from unconventional angles, incorporating Bobby's military close-quarters combat training with ancient martial arts principles. Knife-fighting footwork adapted to prosthetic limitations became devastating empty-hand techniques that targeted specific anatomical vulnerabilities. Your military training taught you to think tactically, Seagal observed as Bobby successfully executed a complex combination. Martial arts will teach you to move tactically. The integration creates capabilities that neither discipline achieves alone. The prosthetic's weight distribution allowed Bobby to shift balance instantaneously, using his artificial limb as an anchor point for spinning attacks and defensive maneuvers. What had felt like clumsy accommodation just days ago now flowed with increasing naturalness. Seagal introduced pressure point striking that exploited the prosthetic's hardness advantage. Nerve clusters that require significant force to disable. With flesh become vulnerable to precise strikes with your carbon fiber edge, he explained, guiding Bobby through anatomical maps that revealed human weakness points. The combination work integrated everything: prosthetic leg sweeps that dropped opponents into vulnerable positions, arm locks that used the artificial limb's rigidity for enhanced leverage, and precise strikes to pressure points that shut down specific muscle groups or nerve clusters. Again, Seagal commanded as Bobby demonstrated a sequence that began with a prosthetic sweep, transitioned to an arm lock, and finished with a strike to the carotid sinus that would cause temporary unconsciousness without permanent damage. Bobby's execution was becoming smoother, more confident. The movements that had seemed impossible during his first session now felt like natural extensions of his adapted anatomy. His military training provided the tactical foundation, while Seagal's instruction gave him the technical tools to implement strategy through physical action. Now you're beginning to understand. Seagal nodded approvingly as Bobby completed the combination with textbook precision. Your greatest weakness has become your greatest strength. But understanding is just the beginning. Tomorrow we start preparing for real application. Bobby left the warehouse carrying more than improved technique. He carried the growing realization that his injury hadn't ended his warrior identity. It had simply forced him to discover a different way of expressing it. The prosthetic that had symbolized everything he'd lost was becoming the foundation for everything he might still become. For the first time since the IED explosion, Bobby Kellerman felt dangerous again. Chapter 12. The industrial warehouse district felt different at 10 p.m., transformed from a place of legitimate commerce into something darker and more predatory. Steven Seagal followed Master Yamamoto's red BMW through streets that grew progressively more isolated, using surveillance techniques refined through decades of military and law enforcement consultation. Yamamoto's destination was a converted warehouse that looked abandoned from the outside, but showed signs of recent activity to trained eyes: fresh tire tracks in the gravel, recently installed security cameras, and the kind of reinforced doors that were designed to keep people in rather than out. Seagal positioned himself in concealment that provided clear sight lines while remaining invisible to casual observation. His military training had taught him patience. His martial arts background had taught him stillness. Combined, they made him nearly undetectable in urban environments. The expensive cars began arriving shortly after 10:30 p.m. Mercedes, BMWs, and Lexuses driven by men whose prosperity seemed inconsistent with legitimate employment. They moved with the careful confidence of people accustomed to operating outside legal boundaries, checking surroundings before entering the warehouse through a side entrance that required a security code. Through industrial windows positioned too high for casual viewing, Seagal observed what appeared to be a professional fighting venue. The basement had been converted into an arena with elevated ring, professional lighting, and sophisticated betting stations that suggested significant financial investment. The fighters were young men, some recognizable as Golden Dragon Academy students who had recently stopped attending regular classes. They showed signs of pharmaceutical enhancement, dilated pupils, excessive muscle definition, and the kind of aggressive energy that suggested performance-enhancing drugs rather than natural conditioning. Seagal documented everything with a camera concealed in cleaning equipment, photographing license plates and facial recognition shots of spectators who clearly represented the kind of wealth that funded illegal enterprises. These weren't street-level criminals. They were sophisticated operators who treated human exploitation as a business model. The fights themselves were brutal beyond any legitimate sporting contest. Participants showed signs of being drugged into compliance, their movements mechanical and their responses to pain indicating chemical suppression of natural protective instincts. Winners were treated like valuable property. Losers were dragged away by handlers who showed no concern for their medical condition. Most disturbing were the conversations Seagal overheard about shipping schedules and international buyers. The underground fighting tournaments were just one component of a larger operation that moved human beings like livestock to wealthy collectors who hosted private gladiatorial matches in locations far from American law enforcement jurisdiction. The American fighters are premium products, he heard one spectator explain to another. Military training, physical conditioning, and psychological resilience make them worth the extra investment. How many are ready for transport? The other asked. 6 this month. Maybe 8 if the new prospects work out. The one-legged veteran might be interesting to certain clients who appreciate novelty. Seagal's blood ran cold. They were already discussing Bobby as potential merchandise, viewing his prosthetic as a selling point to sadistic buyers rather than a limitation to overcome. A young fighter collapsed during his match, showing signs of drug overdose rather than combat-related injury. Instead of providing medical attention, Kozlov's men dragged him away like defective equipment while the tournament continued without pause. Seagal retreated to plan his next move, understanding that Bobby's training had become part of a larger mission with life-or-death stakes. The evidence he'd gathered tonight proved the existence of an international human trafficking network that used martial arts schools as recruitment centers for gladiatorial slavery. Local law enforcement would need federal assistance to dismantle an operation of this scope and sophistication. But federal investigations took time that the young fighters being drugged and shipped overseas didn't have. Bobby's training would need to accelerate beyond anything originally planned. This wasn't just about personal development anymore. It was about saving lives before they disappeared forever into the international black market for human suffering. The next morning at 7:30 a.m., Bobby returned home from training to find Emma sitting at the kitchen table, her blonde hair still messy from sleep, spooning cereal into her mouth with the concentrated determination that only 6-year-olds could manage. Linda was packing her lunch, moving through their morning routine with the efficient grace of a military spouse who'd learned to manage everything while her husband deployed. "Daddy." Emma bounced in her chair as Bobby entered, his t-shirt soaked with sweat, but his posture noticeably more confident than it had been just days ago. "Guess what happened at school yesterday?" Bobby grabbed a towel from the kitchen counter, genuinely curious. Emma's enthusiasm was infectious, and for the first time in months, he felt present enough to engage with his daughter's excitement rather than just enduring it. "What happened, sweetheart?" "A real karate master came to our assembly. He showed us all these cool moves and talked about how martial arts make you strong and brave and help you protect people." Emma's words tumbled over each other in her rush to share the news. "He said he has a special program for gifted young athletes, and Mrs. Patterson thinks I should try it because I'm really good at PE and I never give up on things." The blood drained from Bobby's face. What was this karate master's name? Master Yamamoto. He was so cool, Daddy. He broke boards with his bare hands and did this spinning kick that was like. Emma launched into an enthusiastic pantomime that involved nearly knocking over her orange juice. "Emma." Bobby's voice came out sharper than intended, causing both his wife and daughter to look at him with concern. "You're not joining any martial arts program." Emma's face fell. "But Daddy, all my friends think it looks super cool. Jessica's mom already signed her up, and Tommy's going to try out next week. And Master Yamamoto said kids who work really hard can learn to be just like the warriors in movies." I said no. Bobby's military command voice emerged, the tone that had once directed Marines in combat situations. Emma's eyes filled with tears at the sudden harshness. Linda set down Emma's lunchbox, her nurse's instincts recognizing the signs of Bobby's anxiety spiking beyond normal parameters. "Bobby, what's wrong? It sounds like a legitimate program. The school wouldn't allow someone. The school doesn't know what they're allowing." Bobby cut her off, immediately regretting his tone but unable to modulate his fear-driven response. "Emma is not going anywhere near that man or his program." "But why?" Emma's voice broke with the kind of disappointment that only crushed childhood dreams could produce. "I want to be strong like you, Daddy. I want to learn how to protect myself and help other people like you did in the army." The words hit Bobby like physical blows. Emma saw him as a hero worth emulating, but she wanted to learn from the same man who had publicly humiliated her father and dismissed him as damaged goods. The irony was cruel enough to make him physically sick. "You don't understand," Bobby started, then stopped. How could he explain to a 6-year-old that her exciting new opportunity was actually a recruitment center for human trafficking? How could he tell her that the cool martial arts master was connected to people who viewed children as commodities? "I understand that you don't want me to be strong." Emma shot back with the devastating honesty that children wielded like weapons. "I understand that you think I can't do things just like you think you can't do things." The accusation landed with surgical precision. Emma stormed toward the stairs, her small feet stamping with indignation. "I hate being weak. I hate that you're sad all the time. And I hate that you won't let me try to be brave." Her bedroom door slammed with the finality of a judge's gavel. Linda stared at Bobby with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. "What just happened? Emma's never spoken to you like that, and you've never." Bobby's phone was already in his hand, dialing Seagal's number. "I need to talk to Steve. Right now." When Seagal answered on the first ring, Bobby's voice was barely controlled fury. "He's targeting children now. My daughter. Emma's school. The bastard is recruiting kids. Now it's personal, Bobby." Seagal's voice turned deadly serious. "And we're going to stop this before any children get hurt. Your training just became a mission." Chapter 14. The warehouse felt like a military command center at 6 a.m. the following morning as Steven Seagal laid out tactical maps and surveillance photographs across a makeshift briefing table. Bobby arrived to find his training space transformed into an operational planning facility that would have impressed his Marine intelligence officers. "Complex operations require comprehensive planning," Seagal explained, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had coordinated missions where failure meant innocent lives lost. "We need to gather admissible evidence while infiltrating Kozlov's network without alerting them to our investigation." The plan Seagal outlined was sophisticated enough to require military precision and dangerous enough to end with both of them dead if they made mistakes. Bobby would return to the Golden Dragon Academy with a carefully constructed cover story designed to trigger Yamamoto's greed while providing access to the criminal operation. "Your role is the desperate, disabled veteran who's heard street rumors about alternative income opportunities for fighters willing to take risks," Seagal instructed, showing Bobby surveillance photos of the underground fighting facility. Financial desperation due to inadequate disability benefits, mounting medical expenses, willingness to use your unique physical situation to make money if someone will train you properly. The cover story was believable because it contained elements of truth that Yamamoto would recognize and exploit. Veterans struggling with medical costs, disabled individuals facing employment discrimination, the kind of desperation that made people vulnerable to criminal recruitment. Meanwhile, I maintain my custodial position to document illegal activities from within, Seagal continued, pointing to facility blueprints that showed escape routes and security vulnerabilities. We coordinate through predetermined signals that won't compromise either position. They rehearsed Bobby's approach until every word sounded natural. He would mention hearing through veteran networks about underground fighting opportunities where physical differences could be advantages if you were tough enough to handle unconventional situations. Just desperate enough to be believable, just informed enough to seem like a serious prospect. Seagal provided Bobby with recording equipment disguised as standard items, a pen that captured audio, a watch that took photographs, and a belt buckle that transmitted GPS coordinates to predetermined contacts. The technology was sophisticated enough to gather evidence that would hold up in federal court while being subtle enough to avoid detection during casual searches. The key is patience, Seagal emphasized, his experience with undercover operations evident in every instruction. Yamamoto will test your desperation before revealing anything incriminating. You must seem eager but not suspicious, desperate but not dangerous. They practiced hand signals and communication methods that would allow coordination without blowing their covers. A specific way of positioning cleaning equipment meant danger. Particular movements during training indicated the need for immediate extraction. Emergency protocols that could save their lives if the investigation was discovered. What we're attempting is dangerous beyond normal parameters, Seagal warned as they concluded their planning session. Kozlov's people are former military professionals who kill without hesitation. If they discover our investigation, they won't arrest us. They'll eliminate us and dispose of the evidence. Bobby checked his recording equipment one final time, his military training taking over as the mission parameters became clear. What about Emma? What about the kids he's recruiting through schools? That's why we're doing this, Seagal replied grimly. Those children don't know they're being evaluated as potential merchandise. Their parents think they're signing up for character development and physical fitness. By the time anyone realizes what's actually happening, it's too late. The weight of responsibility settled on Bobby's shoulders like familiar armor. This wasn't just about his personal redemption anymore. It was about protecting innocent children from predators who used martial arts as a hunting ground for human trafficking victims. Remember, Seagal said as Bobby prepared to leave, you're not just gathering evidence. You're buying time for those kids while we build a case that will destroy this entire network. Every day we delay is another day they remain safe. Bobby nodded, understanding that his next visit to the Golden Dragon Academy would determine whether they could save lives or whether more young people would disappear into an international nightmare from which few ever returned. Chapter 15, The Golden Dragon Academy, felt different when Bobby walked through its doors at 7 p.m. on Friday night. The same reception area, the same trophy displays, the same sounds of training echoing from the main floor. But now he understood what lurked beneath the professional veneer. Tracy Wu looked up from her desk with the same uncomfortable recognition, her purple highlights catching the light as she forced a smile. "Oh, hi again," she said, clearly hoping he wouldn't make another scene about training opportunities. "How can I help you?" Bobby had rehearsed this moment dozens of times with Seagal, but his heart still hammered against his ribs as he launched into his cover story. "I wanted to apologize for the other night. Master Yamamoto was right about my limitations. But I've been talking to some guys from my veteran support group, and they mentioned there might be alternative training options here. Different opportunities." Tracy's eyebrows rose slightly. Alternative options? Guys who can handle unconventional situations. Make some money if they're tough enough. Bobby let desperation creep into his voice, playing the role of someone whose pride had been broken down by financial reality. "My medical bills are killing us. Disability doesn't cover everything, and my wife's working double shifts just to keep up. I I'm not sure what you mean, Tracy said carefully, but Bobby caught her glance toward Yamamoto's office. Look, I know I'm not cut out for regular classes, but I heard through the grapevine that there might be opportunities for fighters who can handle different kinds of situations. Guys with military training who aren't afraid to take risks. The key phrase, take risks, had the desired effect. Tracy's expression shifted from confusion to recognition, as if Bobby had just spoken a password she'd been trained to identify. Let me see if Master Yamamoto is available, she said, disappearing into the back office with obvious purpose. While waiting, Bobby positioned himself to observe Seagal, who was methodically cleaning equipment in the background. Their eyes met briefly, and Seagal's subtle nod confirmed that recording devices were activated and positioned for optimal audio capture. Yamamoto emerged with a different demeanor than their previous encounter. Instead of dismissive arrogance, he showed calculating interest as he studied Bobby with the assessment of someone evaluating merchandise rather than dismissing a nuisance. I understand you've had some financial difficulties, Yamamoto said, his voice lowered to a conversational level that wouldn't carry to other students. Military medical care isn't what they promise, is it? Not even close. Bobby let bitterness color his words. They patch you up enough to get you out the door. Then you're on your own with bills that never stop coming. And you mentioned hearing about alternative opportunities? Guys at the VA hospital talk. Word gets around about ways to make real money if you're not afraid to get hurt. Bobby paused, letting his prosthetic shift visibly. Some people think this makes me weak. Other people think it makes me interesting. Yamamoto's smile held no warmth, but it showed genuine interest for the first time. Interesting how? Crowd appeal. Novelty factor. People pay to see things they've never seen before. Bobby was selling himself as a circus freak, and the words tasted like poison, but Yamamoto's growing enthusiasm confirmed that the approach was working. There are certain private tournaments where fighters with unique characteristics can earn substantial compensation, Yamamoto said carefully, his words chosen to be suggestive without being explicitly incriminating. But they require serious commitment and absolute discretion. How serious? Serious enough that fighters who aren't completely dedicated get hurt badly. Yamamoto's tone carried genuine menace. These aren't recreational activities. They're business ventures that require professional attitudes and total loyalty. Bobby nodded with the desperation of a man who had run out of legitimate options. What would I need to do to prove I'm serious? Yamamoto studied him for a long moment, clearly weighing Bobby's potential value against the risks of recruitment. There's a preliminary evaluation next Friday at a private facility. Fighters who demonstrate genuine commitment and capability get invited to participate in more lucrative opportunities. What kind of opportunities? The kind that pay enough to solve your medical bills permanently. Yamamoto's smile turned predatory, but only for fighters who understand that some tournaments have different rules than others. Bobby felt ice in his veins as he realized he was being recruited for the same fate that had befallen the missing students. But he maintained his desperate facade, nodding eagerly at the prospect of financial salvation through violence. Friday night, 10 p.m. Yamamoto handed him a business card with an address written on the back. Come alone, and don't mention this conversation to anyone. Fighters who can't maintain discretion don't get second chances. As Bobby left the academy with the address in his pocket, he caught Seagal's "I won" final time. The subtle hand signal confirmed that everything had been recorded and that extraction protocols were now in effect. Phase 1 was complete. In 1 week, Bobby would walk into the heart of Kozlov's operation with recording equipment and federal backup, or he would disappear forever into an international trafficking network that specialized in making inconvenient people vanish without a trace. Chapter 16. The warehouse location Yamamoto had provided buzzed with illegal activity when Bobby and Seagal arrived separately at 11 p.m. on Friday. The converted industrial building had been transformed into a sophisticated criminal enterprise that operated with the efficiency of a legitimate business and the brutality of an organized crime syndicate. Bobby entered through the main entrance as a recruited fighter, his recording equipment concealed and his military training suppressed beneath a facade of desperate eagerness. The facility's interior confirmed everything Seagal had observed during his surveillance: professional fighting venue, extensive betting operations, and the kind of security presence that suggested significant financial investment in protecting illegal activities. Seagal infiltrated through a service entrance, using lockpicking skills refined through decades of tactical training to access areas where his custodial cover would provide plausible deniability for his presence. His concealed camera documented the trafficking operation with the systematic thoroughness that federal prosecutors would need to secure convictions. Initially, everything proceeded according to their carefully rehearsed plan. Bobby mingled with other fighters while gathering intelligence on the criminal network's scope and methods. The conversations he recorded revealed the international nature of the trafficking operation, with buyers from multiple countries placing orders for specific types of fighters like customers browsing a catalog. Seagal's infiltration proved equally successful as he documented evidence of money laundering, drug distribution, and the systematic exploitation of vulnerable young men who had trusted their martial arts instructor. The facility contained holding areas that were essentially prison cells, transportation schedules that moved human cargo like livestock, and financial records that would expose the entire network's operational structure. They had successfully recorded conversations proving the criminal enterprise, identified several missing persons, and gathered evidence that would save dozens of lives while destroying a major trafficking operation. The mission was proceeding flawlessly until 11:47 p.m., when Viktor Kozlov arrived unexpectedly with additional security personnel. The Russian crime boss's unscheduled appearance triggered a routine security sweep that discovered Seagal's hiding position behind industrial equipment. His concealed recording devices were found immediately, and within minutes, both men were surrounded by armed professionals who moved with military precision. Steven Seagal, Kozlov said with genuine amusement as he examined the confiscated equipment. The famous action movie star, working as a janitor to catch me in my business activities. How theatrical. Under interrogation, Kozlov revealed that their investigation had been compromised from the beginning. Yamamoto had suspected Bobby's return and had him followed, leading to surveillance footage that showed their parking lot conversation days earlier. The entire recruitment had been an elaborate trap designed to capture federal investigators while providing entertaining content for Kozlov's wealthy clients. "You've provided me with an interesting problem," Kozlov continued, his English accented, but precise. Killing famous people creates unwanted attention, but allowing federal investigators to leave creates even more unwanted attention. Bobby and Seagal were quickly restrained with zip-tie bonds and moved to a holding area where they could observe the evening's planned entertainment while Kozlov decided their fate. The months of careful planning and dangerous infiltration had unraveled in minutes, leaving them trapped in the heart of the criminal operation they had hoped to destroy. "Tonight's tournament will be particularly memorable," Kozlov announced with the satisfaction of someone who believed he had eliminated a significant threat to his business. Two new fighters will be making their debuts, whether they want to or not. The trap had snapped shut with devastating completeness. Their federal backup didn't know the investigation had been compromised. Their recording equipment was now evidence of their failed attempt at infiltration. And somewhere above them, wealthy criminals were placing bets on fights that might determine whether Bobby and Seagal lived to see morning. Phase 2 was about to begin, and survival would require skills that no amount of training could have prepared them for. The makeshift holding area beneath Kozlov's main warehouse smelled of sweat, fear, and industrial disinfectant that couldn't quite mask the metallic scent of dried blood. At midnight, Bobby and Seagal sat secured with military-grade zip-tie restraints, while Viktor Kozlov explained his business operations with the confident casualness of someone who believed his prisoners wouldn't live to testify. "Human trafficking is such an ugly term," Kozlov mused, his Russian accent lending gravitas to words that chilled Bobby's blood. "I prefer to think of myself as a talent scout for wealthy collectors who appreciate rare entertainment." The Russian crime boss stood 6'2", with the solid build of someone who had maintained his Spetsnaz conditioning well into his 50s. Tattoos covering his forearms told the story of his violent past in imagery that needed no translation: skulls, daggers, and Cyrillic text that promised death to enemies of the motherland. "The underground fighting tournaments you observed are merely one component of an international network," Kozlov continued, gesturing toward a wall map that showed shipping routes across 3 continents. Young American fighters are premium products because of their military training and physical conditioning. They command exceptional prices from clients who host private gladiatorial matches in locations far from American law enforcement. Bobby's military intelligence training allowed him to process the scope of what Kozlov was revealing. This wasn't a local criminal operation. It was an international trafficking network that moved human beings like livestock to wealthy sadists who treated human suffering as entertainment. The Golden Dragon Academy serves as my primary recruitment center, Kozlov explained with pride in his organizational efficiency. Master Yamamoto identifies physically gifted students without strong family connections, then gradually introduces them to performance-enhancing substances and psychological conditioning that makes them compliant. Through the holding areas, barred windows, Bobby could see 6 teenage fighters in individual cages, their eyes vacant from chemical manipulation and their movements mechanical from psychological abuse. 2 of them matched missing person descriptions from his research. Young men whose families had filed police reports that had gone nowhere because local law enforcement lacked the resources to investigate international trafficking. The process typically takes 3 to 6 months, Kozlov continued. Initial recruitment through legitimate martial arts instruction, gradual introduction to underground fighting circuits, systematic drug dependency, and finally transportation to international buyers who pay premium prices for American fighters. Seagal had remained silent throughout Kozlov's monologue, but Bobby could see his mentor's mind working behind eyes that missed nothing. The zip tie restraints were standard law enforcement equipment, which meant they had specific failure points that could be exploited with proper technique and sufficient motivation. Tonight's tournament features these 6 young men in elimination matches, Kozlov announced, pointing toward the caged fighters. Winners advance to international sales opportunities. Losers are disposed of as training expenses that didn't generate sufficient return on investment. The casual mention of murder made Bobby's stomach clench with rage that he fought to control. These weren't criminals or enemy combatants. They were American kids who had trusted the wrong instructor and found themselves trapped in a nightmare that would end with their deaths or disappearance into international slavery. But tonight also features special entertainment, Kozlov continued, his pale blue eyes focusing on Bobby with predatory interest. A decorated Marine veteran with a prosthetic leg versus my champion, Dmitry Volkov. The novelty will provide exceptional betting opportunities for my clientele. Through reinforced glass, Bobby could see into the main arena where approximately 200 wealthy spectators had gathered for the illegal tournament. They wore expensive clothing and discussed betting odds with the casual enthusiasm of people attending legitimate sporting events, completely disconnected from the human suffering that would provide their entertainment. If you win, everyone goes free, Kozlov announced with a smile that promised the opposite. If you lose, you join my inventory along with your famous friend. Either way, you've provided me with a memorable evening. The ultimatum was classic. Criminal theater, an impossible choice designed to provide psychological torture before inevitable defeat. But Bobby's military training had taught him that impossible situations sometimes contained overlooked possibilities, and Seagal's presence suggested that their capture might not be as complete as it appeared. Kozlov's confidence was about to be tested by 2 men who had survived worse odds than anything his criminal empire could produce. Chapter 18. The arena's main floor buzzed with the energy of wealthy criminals who had paid premium prices to witness human suffering transformed into entertainment. At 12:30 a.m., approximately 200 spectators filled elevated seating that surrounded a professional fighting ring, their expensive clothing and casual cruelty creating an atmosphere that reminded Bobby of Roman gladiatorial matches. The basement had been converted with sophisticated attention to detail, professional lighting that eliminated shadows, sound systems that amplified every impact, and betting stations where wealthy sadists placed wagers on how long fighters would survive rather than who would win. This wasn't underground fighting. It was industrialized murder disguised as sport. Bobby saw the 6 teenage fighters in holding cages that lined one wall, their vacant expressions confirming everything Kozlov had revealed about systematic drugging and psychological manipulation. 2 faces matched missing person reports he had studied. Jason Chun from Sacramento and Marcus Williams from Phoenix, both reported missing by families who had received no assistance from overwhelmed local police departments. The boys showed signs of extensive pharmaceutical manipulation that went beyond simple performance enhancement. Their pupils were dilated to pinpoints, their responses to external stimuli delayed and mechanical, and their body language suggested complete psychological surrender to chemical dependency and systematic abuse. Ladies and gentlemen, Kozlov's voice boomed through the arena's sound system as he addressed his wealthy audience with the enthusiasm of a carnival barker. Tonight's main event features a decorated American Marine veteran with a prosthetic leg versus our undefeated champion, Dmitry Volkov. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Cheers that had nothing to do with athletic appreciation and everything to do with sadistic anticipation of watching a disabled veteran be systematically destroyed for their entertainment. Dmitry Volkov entered the arena to thunderous applause from spectators who recognized him as Kozlov's primary enforcer and underground fighting champion. The Russian stood 6'6" and weighed approximately 280 pounds of muscle that had been enhanced far beyond natural limitations through military-grade steroids and experimental performance drugs. Volkov's massive frame showed disproportionate muscle development that suggested years of chemical enhancement, while multiple scars from previous fights created a roadmap of violence across his torso and arms. His shaved head and dead eyes suggested psychological conditioning that had eliminated normal human responses to pain and empathy. Our champion has never lost a match. Kozlov continued his introduction while betting odds flashed on digital displays throughout the arena. 43 victories, 38 fatalities, 0 defeats. He has been enhanced with the finest pharmaceutical products that Russian military science can provide. The crowd placed bets heavily against Bobby, viewing him as novelty entertainment, rather than a legitimate threat to their superhuman champion. The odds displayed on arena screens showed Bobby at 50 to 1 against, with most wagers focused on how many minutes he would survive rather than any possibility of victory. Bobby was escorted to a fighter's preparation area where he could remove his prosthetic for inspection and begin mentally preparing for what appeared to be certain death. The carbon fiber limb showed no obvious damage from his restraint and transportation, but his body ached from zip-tie marks and the psychological stress of understanding what failure would mean for 6 innocent teenagers. Kozlov approached the preparation area with the confident swagger of someone who controlled every variable in the upcoming confrontation. The rules are simple, Marine. No time limit, no referee. Fight continues until one participant cannot continue. Medical attention will not be provided regardless of injury severity. And if I win, everyone goes free, as promised. Kozlov's smile made it clear that he considered victory impossible. But understand that Dmitry has been chemically and psychologically conditioned to fight until death rather than accept defeat. Surrender is not in his programming. Bobby strapped on his prosthetic while studying his opponent through the preparation area's viewing window. Volkov moved with the fluid grace of someone whose massive size had been enhanced rather than hindered by pharmaceutical manipulation, shadowboxing with explosive speed that demonstrated capabilities far beyond normal human parameters. The contrast was stark and seemingly insurmountable. A one-legged veteran whose greatest advantage was determination versus a chemically enhanced killing machine whose only programming was systematic destruction of anything placed in front of him. But Bobby's military training had taught him that impossible odds sometimes contained overlooked advantages, and his recent education with Steven Seagal had shown him possibilities that went far beyond conventional thinking about combat limitations. The arena's crowd roared with anticipation as the main event approached, their wealthy sadism about to be satisfied by what they believed would be a brief and brutal demonstration of power-destroying weakness. They had no idea they were about to witness the opposite. Chapter 19, the fighter's preparation area, felt like a confessional booth at 12:45 a.m. as Steven Seagal was briefly allowed to coach Bobby before the match that would determine the fate of 6 innocent teenagers. Despite their zip-tie restraints and desperate circumstances, Seagal maintained the characteristic calm that had defined his decades of martial arts mastery and crisis management. Size and strength mean nothing without proper technique and mental discipline, Seagal said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had faced impossible odds and survived through superior understanding rather than superior force. Volkov is a soldier, but you're a warrior. He fights with anger and chemicals. You fight with purpose and precision. Bobby's hands shook slightly as he checked his prosthetics attachment points, the carbon fiber limb suddenly feeling like inadequate protection against a superhuman opponent designed specifically to kill people like him. But Seagal's presence provided an anchor of confidence in an ocean of seemingly hopeless circumstances. Your prosthetic provides unique advantages that steroids cannot counter, Seagal continued, his teaching instincts overriding their desperate situation. It cannot be injured in ways that would disable natural limbs. It's harder than bone and perfectly balanced for striking specific pressure points. Most importantly, Volkov has never faced an opponent who can weaponize what appears to be a disability. Seagal taught Bobby one final advanced technique that combined his military explosives training with his prosthetics carbon fiber construction. By striking specific nerve clusters at precise angles with the prosthetic's hard edge, he could create devastating neural disruption that would shut down even chemically enhanced opponents. The technique requires perfect timing, Seagal emphasized, guiding Bobby through the movement in slow motion. Volkov's drug enhancement makes him faster and stronger, but it also makes him predictable and overconfident. Use his aggression against him. Redirect his attacks while targeting vulnerable points that chemicals cannot protect. They practiced the pressure point combination once, Bobby's prosthetic making contact with anatomical targets that would cause temporary paralysis regardless of pharmaceutical enhancement. The key was using Volkov's own momentum to generate the force necessary for neural disruption while avoiding his overwhelming physical advantages. Remember everything we've learned about turning disadvantages into advantages, Seagal instructed as guards approached to escort Bobby to the arena. Your prosthetic isn't a limitation. It's proof of your ability to overcome anything life presents. You've already survived losing a leg in combat. This is just another day at the office. Bobby stood, testing his balance and reviewing the mental checklist that would keep him alive for the next few minutes. His military tactical training merged with Seagal's martial arts philosophy to create a combat mindset that viewed seemingly impossible situations as problems requiring creative solutions rather than hopeless scenarios requiring surrender. What if the technique doesn't work? Bobby asked, voicing the fear that both men had carefully avoided discussing. Then you improvise, adapt, and overcome, just like every Marine who has ever faced superior force with inferior resources. Seagal's eyes held the kind of confidence that came from absolute faith in human potential when properly directed. But, Bobby, the technique will work because you understand something Volkov doesn't. What's that? You're not fighting for money or entertainment or chemical enhancement. You're fighting to save 6 kids who trusted the wrong adult and found themselves trapped in hell. Seagal's voice carried the weight of absolute moral certainty. Warriors who fight for others are always more dangerous than soldiers who fight for themselves. Guards escorted Seagal away as Bobby prepared for his entrance into an arena where wealthy criminals had gathered to watch him die for their amusement. But he carried with him more than advanced techniques and tactical knowledge. He carried the understanding that some fights transcended personal survival and became moral imperatives that demanded victory regardless of odds. Somewhere above him, 6 American teenagers waited in cages, their lives depending on whether a one-legged Marine veteran could prove that character mattered more than chemistry in determining who walked away from mortal combat. The arena doors opened, and Bobby Kellerman stepped into the lights carrying the hopes of everyone who had ever been dismissed as damaged goods by people who confused physical perfection with human worth. Chapter 20. The arena erupted in thunderous boos as Bobby entered at 1 a.m., his uneven gait and visible prosthetic making him appear pathetically outmatched against the pharmaceutical monster awaiting him in the ring. The crowd of wealthy criminals viewed him as a curiosity act, damaged goods provided for their amusement before the real entertainment of systematic destruction began. Dmitry Volkov stood in the center of the fighting space like a monument to chemical enhancement, his massive frame demonstrating what happened when military training met unlimited access to performance-enhancing drugs. At 6'6" and 280 pounds of artificially enhanced muscle, he moved with explosive speed that defied his enormous size, while shadowboxing combinations that would have hospitalized normal opponents. The contrast was stark enough to be comedic. If the stakes hadn't been life and death, Bobby appeared small, damaged, and overwhelmed, a one-legged veteran whose greatest asset seemed to be stubborn determination versus a Russian killing machine whose only programming was systematic destruction of anything placed in front of him. When the unofficial signal came to begin, Volkov attacked with the brutal efficiency that had made him Kozlov's primary enforcer and undefeated underground champion. His opening combination, a devastating jab crosshook sequence followed by a knee strike that could break ribs, demonstrated the overwhelming physical advantages that chemical enhancement provided. Bobby absorbed tremendous punishment during the opening exchange, his military pain tolerance allowing him to remain conscious through impacts that should have ended the fight immediately. The crowd roared with sadistic pleasure as their expectations were confirmed. This would be a brief demonstration of power destroying weakness. But experienced fighters in the audience began noticing subtle details that casual observers missed. Bobby wasn't just surviving Volkov's attacks. He was studying them, timing their rhythm, and positioning himself strategically while appearing to be overwhelmed. Bobby employed defensive techniques Seagal had taught him, using his prosthetic to block devastating kicks that would have shattered natural bone. The carbon fiber construction absorbed impacts that would have disabled flesh and blood limbs while providing opportunities for counterattacks that Volkov hadn't anticipated. His military tactical training became evident as he treated the fight like a combat mission, gathering intelligence on enemy capabilities, identifying weaknesses in attack patterns, and waiting for optimal moments to implement offensive strategies. While Volkov relied on overwhelming force and chemical enhancement, Bobby applied discipline and technique with surgical precision. The crowd's cheers gradually turned to confused murmurs as Bobby began demonstrating capabilities that hadn't been apparent during his initial beating. His movement became more fluid, his defensive positioning more sophisticated, and his counterattacks more precisely targeted at anatomical vulnerabilities that steroids couldn't protect. "He's studying him," one spectator observed with growing unease. "The cripple is actually learning Volkov's patterns." Bobby's prosthetic began functioning as both weapon and shield in combinations that Volkov had never encountered. When the Russian threw powerful leg kicks, Bobby blocked with carbon fiber that didn't compress or transmit pain, while immediately countering with strikes to nerve clusters behind Volkov's knee that temporarily deadened his attacking leg. The pharmaceutical monster's drug-enhanced aggression was beginning to work against him as Bobby redirected overwhelming force into throws and joint locks that used Volkov's momentum against his artificially enlarged frame. What had begun as systematic destruction was evolving into a chess match between enhanced power and tactical intelligence. For the first time since the fight began, doubt flickered across Volkov's dead eyes as he realized his usual tactics weren't producing their expected results. The damaged American veteran was proving more resilient and adaptable than anything his chemical programming had prepared him to handle. The arena's atmosphere shifted from confident sadism to nervous uncertainty, as wealthy spectators realized their entertainment might not conclude with the foregone result they had paid to witness. Something was happening that none of them had anticipated. The underdog was fighting back. At 1:15 a.m., Bobby seized his first real opportunity as Volkov overcommit to a devastating haymaker that left the Russian giant momentarily off balance. Using an Aikido principle Seagal had drilled into him, Bobby redirected Volkov's enormous momentum into a throw that sent 280 pounds of enhanced muscle crashing into the arena wall with bone-jarring impact. The crowd's confident cheers died in their throats as they witnessed something impossible, their invincible champion being handled like an amateur by the one-legged veteran they dismissed as a freak show. The sound of Volkov's impact echoed through the arena like a gunshot, followed by stunned silence from spectators who had paid premium prices to watch systematic destruction, not tactical brilliance. Bobby immediately capitalized on the opening, implementing the adaptive techniques Seagal had taught him with devastating effectiveness. His prosthetic became both weapon and shield in combinations that Volkov's drug-enhanced programming had never encountered. When the Russian threw another powerful leg kick, Bobby blocked with carbon fiber that absorbed the impact without damage while simultaneously countering with a precise strike to the nerve cluster behind Volkov's knee. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Volkov's attacking leg went temporarily numb, equalizing their mobility and proving that technique could overcome pharmaceutical advantages when applied with surgical precision. The giant stumbled, his perfect balance compromised for the first time in his underground fighting career. "Impossible," Kozlov muttered from his VIP viewing position, his confidence shaken as Bobby continued demonstrating capabilities that shouldn't exist in a disabled veteran fighting a chemically enhanced super soldier. Bobby's military close-quarters combat training merged seamlessly with Seagal's martial arts instruction as he began systematically dismantling Volkov's advantages. Each strike targeted specific anatomical vulnerabilities, pressure points that shut down muscle groups, nerve clusters that disrupted coordination, and structural weaknesses that no amount of steroids could reinforce. The prosthetic that had symbolized Bobby's limitations became the instrument of Volkov's downfall. Its carbon fiber construction delivered devastating impacts to targets that would have caused excruciating pain to natural limbs. Its perfect balance and mechanical precision generated striking power that exceeded what biological anatomy could produce. "He's targeting the nervous system," one of the more sophisticated spectators observed with growing alarm. "Every strike is shutting down specific functions." The teenage fighters in their cages began showing signs of awareness as the drug-induced stupor that had kept them compliant started lifting in response to witnessing someone successfully fighting back against their captors. Their vacant expressions flickered with something that might have been hope as they watched the impossible unfold before their eyes. Bobby continued his systematic assault, using Volkov's drug-enhanced aggression against him with textbook efficiency. The steroids that gave the Russian strength also made him predictable and reckless, creating opportunities for counters that relied on timing rather than power. A complex combination sequence demonstrated everything Bobby had learned about turning disadvantages into advantages. He used his prosthetic as an anchor point for a spinning attack that caught Volkov in the temple, followed immediately by a joint lock that hyperextended the giant's elbow, concluding with a pressure point strike that temporarily paralyzed his left arm. The crowd watched in horrified fascination as their unbeatable champion accumulated damage from an opponent who shouldn't have been able to touch him. Betting odds that had started at 50-1 against Bobby were rapidly shifting as spectators realized they were witnessing something unprecedented in underground fighting history. Volkov's dead eyes began showing the first signs of uncertainty and fear as his chemical programming encountered situations it had never been designed to handle. For the first time in his career as Kozlov's enforcer, he was losing a fight to someone who possessed superior skill rather than superior enhancement. The arena's atmosphere had completely transformed from confident sadism to nervous tension as wealthy criminals realized their entertainment had become something far more dangerous. A demonstration that their carefully controlled world of chemical enhancement and systematic brutality could be defeated by human courage and proper training. Bobby Kellerman was proving that warriors were not manufactured in laboratories, but forged through adversity, and that true strength came not from pharmaceutical enhancement, but from the unbreakable will to protect innocent lives regardless of personal cost. Chapter 22. While the arena's attention remained fixated on Bobby's impossible success against Volkov at 1:25 a.m., Steven Seagal worked methodically on his zip tie restraints using techniques refined through decades of military consultation and tactical training. The plastic bonds were law enforcement grade, but they possessed specific structural weaknesses that could be exploited through proper manipulation of stress points and leverage angles, using micro-movements that appeared to be normal shifting. For comfort, Seagal systematically weakened the locking mechanism by applying precise pressure to the binding's failure points. Years of teaching military personnel how to escape similar restraints had given him intimate knowledge of every manufacturer's design flaws and operational limitations. The crowd's thunderous reactions to Bobby's fight provided perfect audio cover as Seagal completed his escape with practiced efficiency. 1 moment he was securely restrained. The next, he was free and moving through Kozlov's facility with the lethal grace that had made him a legend in both Hollywood and actual combat situations. Seagal's movement through the criminal facility was a masterpiece of tactical infiltration. His years of training law enforcement and military personnel had taught him to navigate hostile environments with minimal noise and maximum efficiency, turning any space into an operational advantage through superior understanding of human psychology and architectural vulnerabilities. The first guard encountered Seagal while conducting a routine security check of the facility's lower levels. The confrontation lasted less than 3 seconds, a lightning-fast combination of joint manipulation and pressure point strikes that left the armed man unconscious before he could raise an alarm or draw his weapon. Seagal's signature Aikido style became devastatingly apparent as he encountered additional security personnel. He used each opponent's energy against them, redirecting attacks into devastating counters that neutralized threats with minimal wasted motion. Guards who had seemed professional and dangerous moments earlier found themselves disarmed and unconscious without understanding how their tactical superiority had been so completely reversed. "Control the center, control the fight," Seagal murmured to himself, applying principles that worked equally well in individual combat and facility-wide tactical situations. Each neutralized guard was positioned to appear normally stationed rather than incapacitated, buying precious time before their absence would be noticed. The teenage fighters in their holding cages watched with growing amazement as this seemingly aging janitor moved through armed professionals like a force of nature. Their drug-induced compliance began dissolving completely as they witnessed undeniable proof that their captors were not invincible gods, but merely criminals who could be defeated by superior skill and righteous purpose. Seagal freed each cage with lockpicking techniques that turned high-security containment into minor inconveniences. "Stay quiet and follow my lead," he instructed the teenagers, his calm authority cutting through their pharmaceutical confusion and systematic conditioning. "We're going home tonight." His systematic clearing of the facility continued with mechanical precision. Guards stationed at strategic positions found themselves unconscious before they could comprehend the threat approaching from their blind spots. Security systems that had seemed impenetrable were neutralized through combinations of technical knowledge and physical capability that turned sophisticated criminal infrastructure into operational advantages for the infiltrator. The sound of Bobby's fight echoing from the arena above provided perfect psychological cover as Seagal reached the main level, having neutralized every guard between the holding cells and the exit routes. His years of teaching tactical operations had prepared him for exactly this type of facility assault, and Kozlov's criminals discovered too late that they had captured someone whose reputation for cinematic violence was based on very real capabilities. "Time to end this," Seagal said quietly as he reached the arena level, his calm voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty about how the evening would conclude. The criminal enterprise that had seemed so sophisticated and impregnable was about to learn why some legends never fade. They simply choose their moments to remind the world why they became legendary in the first place. Above him, Bobby's fight against Volkov was reaching its climax, but Seagal's tactical preparation had already determined the real outcome of the evening's confrontation between justice and criminal exploitation. Chapter 23. The arena erupted in chaos at 1:35 a.m. as Bobby faced Dmitry Volkov's final, desperate attack. The Russian giant, realizing his pharmaceutical advantages were proving insufficient against superior technique and unbreakable determination, pulled a concealed knife in direct violation of Kozlov's stated rules, a move that transformed the contest from underground fighting into attempted murder. The crowd's reaction was immediate and visceral. Wealthy spectators who had paid premium prices for controlled violence found themselves witnessing something far more dangerous: a chemically enhanced killer abandoning all pretense of sport in favor of pure survival instinct. Betting odds became meaningless as the fight evolved beyond entertainment into life-or-death combat. Bobby's military training took complete control as the knife appeared in Volkov's massive fist. Years of close-quarters combat instruction kicked in automatically, transforming him from martial arts student into tactical operator whose primary mission was neutralizing an armed threat while protecting innocent lives. The knife thrust came with pharmaceutical-enhanced speed, but Bobby's prosthetic provided the perfect blocking mechanism. The carbon fiber construction trapped Volkov's weapon arm with mechanical precision, creating a lever that natural bone could never have achieved. The artificial limb that had symbolized Bobby's limitations became the instrument of his opponent's defeat. With Volkov's knife arm controlled and his balance compromised, Bobby executed the final technique Seagal had taught him, a precision strike to the carotid artery that caused immediate unconsciousness without permanent damage. The massive Russian collapsed like a felled tree, his enhanced physique finally succumbing to properly applied human anatomy knowledge. The arena fell silent as Bobby stood victorious over his chemically enhanced opponent, having proven that skill, determination, and fighting for righteous causes could overcome any artificial advantage. The wealthy criminals who had gathered to witness systematic destruction instead observed something that challenged their fundamental worldview: character, triumphing over chemistry. At that exact moment, Steven Seagal appeared at the arena entrance with Detective Roy Patterson and a full SWAT team, their tactical gear and professional demeanor transforming the illegal entertainment venue into an active crime scene. Seagal's law enforcement contacts had coordinated a simultaneous raid that would capture the entire criminal enterprise in one comprehensive operation. Ladies and gentlemen, Seagal's voice carried across the arena with the authority of someone who had just single-handedly neutralized a facility full of armed criminals. This establishment is now under federal investigation for human trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. The reaction was immediate pandemonium as 200 wealthy criminals realized their evening of entertainment had become a federal law enforcement operation that would expose their involvement in international trafficking. Panic spread through the arena as spectators understood that their identities, financial records, and criminal associations were now evidence in a case that would destroy their carefully constructed legitimate facades. Viktor Kozlov attempted to escape through a route his security planning had designated for exactly this type of emergency, but found his path blocked by Steven Seagal, who had been waiting with the patience of someone who understood that criminals always ran toward their predetermined escape routes when operations collapsed. "You made a critical error, Victor," Seagal said with calm certainty as the Russian crime boss realized his situation had become hopeless. "You forgot that some Americans don't break when you try to exploit their weaknesses." The confrontation lasted exactly as long as Seagal allowed it to last. One moment Kozlov was reaching for a concealed weapon. The next, he was unconscious on the floor, having experienced a demonstration of why Hollywood had spent decades trying to capture Seagal's actual capabilities on film. The facility was systematically secured within minutes as federal agents processed evidence that would dismantle an international trafficking network, free dozens of victims, and expose wealthy criminals who had treated human suffering as premium entertainment. The teenagers Bobby had fought to save were immediately provided medical attention and victim services support that would begin their recovery from systematic exploitation. Master Kevin Yamamoto was arrested at the Golden Dragon Academy in a coordinated operation that seized financial records proving his role as a recruitment center for international human trafficking. His empire of exploitation crumbled as authorities discovered evidence of systematic drugging, psychological manipulation, and the sale of American citizens to overseas buyers. Bobby received medical treatment for injuries sustained during his fight with Volkov, but his wounds were superficial compared to the psychological healing that came from understanding his purpose had been restored. The prosthetic leg that had seemed like a symbol of everything he'd lost had become proof of everything he could still accomplish when fighting for causes larger than himself. Chapter 24. 3 months later, on a sunny Saturday morning at 10 a.m., Bobby unlocked the doors of his new martial arts academy with hands that no longer shook from phantom pain or psychological uncertainty. The converted storefront in downtown Riverside bore a simple sign: Warrior Spirit Dojo, adaptive martial arts for everyone. Words that promised exactly what they delivered without pretense or exploitation. The space had been designed with accessibility as a core principle rather than an afterthought. Specialized training equipment accommodated students with various physical limitations, while wall displays featured photographs of students achieving personal goals rather than tournament trophies that served instructor egos. Every element reflected Bobby's understanding that true martial arts built character through challenge rather than exclusion through impossible standards. Linda and Emma helped prepare for the grand opening, hanging banners that read "Strength through adversity" and "Every limitation is an opportunity," mottos that had emerged from Bobby's own journey from broken veteran to confident teacher. Emma wore a miniature GI that matched her father's, her excitement about finally learning martial arts from someone who understood that courage came in many forms. The first students began arriving shortly after opening, a mixture that would have been impossible at the Golden Dragon Academy but felt perfectly natural at Warrior Spirit Dojo. Disabled veterans seeking purpose, at-risk youth needing discipline, former Golden Dragon Academy students wanting authentic instruction, and families who valued character development over competitive achievement. Among the early arrivals were Jason Chun and Marcus Williams, the teenagers rescued from Kozlov's trafficking operation who had specifically requested training from the man who had saved their lives. Their recovery was ongoing, but their presence demonstrated that survival was possible and growth could emerge from even the darkest experiences. Steven Seagal arrived as the guest of honor, dressed simply but carrying the respect of everyone present who understood his role in transforming one man's personal crisis into a mission that had saved dozens of lives. His formal presentation of a black belt in adaptive martial arts, a discipline they had developed together, represented recognition of Bobby's journey from victim to victor to teacher. True martial arts are not about creating superior beings, Seagal said as he addressed the opening ceremony gathering. They are about helping people discover the strength they already possess and the purpose that gives that strength meaning. Emma took her first official lesson with the beaming pride of a daughter who finally understood why her father was a real hero rather than someone to pity. Bobby's instruction combined military precision with patient encouragement, creating an environment where students learned that failure was part of growth rather than evidence of unworthiness. Detective Roy Patterson stopped by to provide updates on the criminal cases that had emerged from their investigation. Kozlov had received life in prison without parole. Yamamoto got 25 years for his role in the trafficking network. And federal prosecutors were systematically dismantling international connections that had operated for years without exposure. The dojo's philosophy emerged naturally from Bobby's experience. Every student possessed unique capabilities that could be developed through proper instruction and personal commitment. Disabilities, disadvantages, and difficult backgrounds became starting points for growth rather than barriers to participation. As the day concluded with Bobby teaching his first group class, students of all abilities working together to master techniques adapted to their individual circumstances, the transformation was complete. The prosthetic leg that had once symbolized everything he'd lost had become the foundation for everything he could still give. Proof that warriors were defined not by their physical perfection, but by their willingness to protect others and never surrender to circumstances beyond their control. Emma's laughter echoed through the dojo as she successfully completed her first technique, a sound that reminded Bobby why some battles were worth fighting regardless of odds. Outside, Riverside went about its daily business protected by people who understood that true strength came from character rather than chemistry, and that the greatest victories were measured not in personal achievement, but in lives transformed through service to others. The Warrior Spirit Dojo stood as proof that redemption was always possible for those willing to turn their greatest weaknesses into their most powerful strengths, and that the best teachers were often those who had learned their most important lessons through adversity rather than advantage. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.